We have a really amazing panel planned for you. I'm Pat Salber, and I'm the founder and host of The Doctor Weighs In. But I'm also, I realize I have to say formerly double-boarded emergency physician and internist. But I've worked on every single side of healthcare. I've worked as a physician executive. I've worked for health plans. I've been a chief medical officer, so I had to talk to doctors about prior authorization and other things that made them really happy. And I've been a consultant for CMS. So my point of telling you all of this is that I've really been there and done that. I've seen just about everything. And the topic of today's conversation is so important. We've been talking about transparency in healthcare, I hate to say it, but for decades. And we're now, I believe, you'll see as a result of this conversation, on the verge of being able to have real transparency around drug pricing. And the reason why it's important is that it turns out that costs of drug drive a lot of medication non-adherence. And only a $10 copay, can you imagine that, a $10 copay? Who even has a $10 copay anymore? Can decrease people's willingness to pick up their drugs. So imagine if you're the typical health plan person that I know and your copay is $30, $40, $50 and sometimes more. So luckily there are tools, there is software available, and we're going to start out by talking about that can help at the point of care when I, as a physician, am sitting in front of my patient, help me and that patient to make a decision about which is the right drug for me to prescribe and which is the right place or the right means for them to actually get that prescription filled. So my panelists, I have an esteemed group of panelists. I'm going to start with one who has a famous name, Neil Simon. And Neil is with, and everybody says, no, you mean Paul Simon. No, I mean Neil Simon. You have a theater named after you.
That's correct.
And Neil is with Aprima, and I thought you could just say a few words about your role in all of this, and before we dive into things, what is it that Aprima does that has anything to do with what we're talking about today?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Neil Simon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Aprima Medical Software. We are in the EHR industry, so we develop EHRs, practice management, and RCM services for our customers. I myself have been in the industry over 20 years, so I've had a lot of experience as it's grown and changed over time. And I was heavily involved working with Surescripts on the implementation of PMBC and real-time formulary and showing that and how providers interact with it.
Fantastic. And next is Casey Leonetti. Did I say it right?
You did.
And she's with CVS Health. So, Casey, what's that got to do with this topic?
Great. I lead our PBM innovation team at CVS Health, and what we focus on is building new solutions and technology-enabled processes to deliver value in the healthcare system, make it easier to help patients on their path to better health by accessing the most affordable therapies that are available to them. One of our most recent developments has been working with Surescripts and several EHRs to provide access to real-time benefits, therapeutic alternatives, and fully automating the electronic prior auth process.
Excellent. And so next is Lynne Nowak, who's a physician and works for Express Scripts. So talk to us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Lynne Nowak, and as she mentioned, I'm an internal medicine physician as well. My role at Express Scripts is that I'm our Vice President of Clinical and Physician Engagement. And what that really means is I actually am our Chief Physician Experience Officer. And my role and my team's role is to really focus on how are we as a pharmacy benefit manager, as well as a home delivery pharmacy and a specialty pharmacy, how are we making that experience for physicians as easy and seamless as possible as we're processing our patients' prescription benefits and delivering their medications through our home delivery channels.
Fantastic, thank you. And next, last but not least, is Tom Skelton, who's the CEO of Surescripts. And instead of introducing yourself, I'm going to start with you in the question, and you can wrap your introduction into the first question.
That's not what this says. Yeah.
Oh, so they didn't brief you that I changed everything up. So we're going to have a completely spontaneous conversation about this. And Tom, I want to say that I think what Surescripts is doing is absolutely fantastic and so crucial and essential to this whole idea of prescription drug transparency. So I thought we should start with just explaining to everybody exactly what it is that you're up to. How does the Surescripts software and process actually work to help not just with the physician experience, which I think is very important, but to me what's the most important is the dyad. It's me and my patient. It's me and the conversation I have with my patient at the time that I'm writing a prescription. How are you making that easier for us?
Yep. No, thanks. I appreciate it. From our standpoint, what we're doing with real-time prescription benefits is a natural outgrowth of what we've been doing since 2001. The idea was we were founded to stand up the nation's e-prescribing network, to connect physicians' offices, PBMs, payers, and pharmacists. What we've introduced is a tool set that allows our EHR partners to integrate into their solution the capability to display the type of information that we've been talking about here. Pricing information, therapeutic alternatives, alternative channels, those types of things, so that the right medication gets to the patient. But more importantly than that, to your point, at the point of prescribing, we desire to facilitate a discussion between the prescribing physician and the patient about what is going to happen next and what choices they can make today at the point of care to make sure that they get the best price and they get the right alternative that matches their plan and matches where they're at. You know, we rely on our partners to do this. The EHRs are a key component, the PBMs and payers are a key component, the pharmacists are a key component, and that's really what the Surescripts Network Alliance is all about.
Well, I think it's really fantastic because for years, doctors have been unable to have that conversation because, first of all, they may not have even thought it was part of their job to have that conversation. And I think they didn't really understand until prices spiraled so much out of control in terms of pharmaceutical costs, how important it is in terms of me as a patient being able to comply with my physician's orders. If I can't afford it, I can't afford it. And the chances are I'm not going to tell you because I might be embarrassed or I might think you wouldn't really care. So, Neil, I wanted to come to you because you were involved in developing, or your company was involved in developing the software that helps to power Surescripts in EHRs. And I was wondering how you went about deciding what was going to be important for the doctor to see. Did you actually ask doctors? Did you ask patients? Who did you talk to? How did you come up with what you ended up developing?
Oh, great. Yeah, you know, one of the things we love about Surescripts is our partnership, and that it's not Surescripts says, do it this way. They come to us with ideas and say, how can we make it work? And one of the things I learned in my experience with healthcare, when I first got in, I didn't realize that pharmacists look at prescriptions one way, and physicians look at prescriptions very differently. And you would think they'd be the same, but they're not really. And so,
how are they different?
Well, you know, pharmacists care about packaging and pricing and all that stuff, and doctors care about what does it do and the strengths, and the coding systems are even different. And so when we first worked with Surescripts, you know, we looked at it. They're like, okay, well, you give us the whole information on the script, and we'll tell you how much it costs. And I'm like, that's great, but when we talk to our providers, by the time they've written the whole script and now you tell me how much it costs, it's too late. You made me waste 1 minute filling in all these fields, and I now need to pick a different drug or different alternative that the PBM might have recommended. So one of the things we started when we started implementing, we did show it to our providers, because really patients don't see this, it's really the providers that see it. And we got that feedback, and so we worked with them together to tweak it so that early on, as soon as possible, we can show those therapeutic alternatives, show roughly what that drug is going to cost. It might not be precise, because we don't know how many pills are going to be dispensed yet and all that, but you have a rough idea so the physician right away could change their mind if they realize this drug is not on formulary or this drug is really expensive. And we want to do that really early in the process versus doing it at the very end when that was originally what was thought, because then the doctor would get frustrated, like, wait, why did I do all this work and now I'm doing a totally different medication? And so that's just an example of how we work together to, I think, come up with a better solution, because, you know, providers want to see this right away. before they do a lot of decision making.
Well, I think that was very smart, because one of the things that we find about failures in digital health are that people fail to think about the physician's workflow. And if you're going to mess with my workflow when I don't have any time in my day anyway, I can tell you I'm probably going to go back and do something else, pen and paper, whatever. So Casey and Lynne, I know you both partnered with Surescripts on pilots around this prescribing at the point of care. Can you tell us a little bit? We'll start with you, Casey, and then go to you, Lynne. Tell us a little bit about the pilot, and then any results that you had. What kind of results did you see, and what did you learn from the pilot, and what are you going to do going forward based on that experiment?
Yeah, so I'd actually love to give that journey, because we're actually on the second version of what we've done. So Neil talked about the importance of the timing in that prescriber's workflow, and what we've been focused on is what are the key pieces of information that are needed to facilitate that discussion that you were just talking about between the provider and the patient to figure out what is the best decision to be made. And so through the first phase of this, we learned that really there's more information needed, and that's what we've most recently been able to deploy, which is the information needs to be real time to that patient's benefit plan and coverage. So depending on where they are in that deductible, depending on what their plan is, that specific member's information, it needs to be real time. And so being able to transmit real time coverage information, whether or not they need a prior authorization, whether or not that drug is covered, what the patient's out-of-pocket cost is, but even more relevant to the decision, which is also a new development that we've added based on the early feedback, is what are the other therapeutically equivalent alternatives where we can show, hey, you have options beyond just this initial drug that's been prescribed. So we've really worked on not just the timing aspect, but what are all the pieces of information to present to facilitate that discussion. So coverage, does it require a PA, therapeutic alternatives, and cost are all important factors, and we're presenting those in real time to facilitate that discussion on what's the best option.
Yeah, fantastic. Lynne, did you have a similar experience?
Absolutely, and I would echo much what Casey said as far as getting the feedback from the physicians around what they need. And we actually implemented right around the same time that our work with real-time prescription benefit initiated with Surescripts. It coincided nicely with us convening a panel we call our medical advisory board. So really the purpose of this panel is to get feedback from our physicians to really then be able to work with our partners on that feedback. So just a couple key principles that we really have drawn from not only my experience in the trenches as a prescribing physician, but from our colleagues that we bring in to discuss this, are things, it must be in the workflow. And that really is critical, because, and this kind of leads to the second point, which is it needs to make the doctor's life easier, not harder. And that's something that we as an industry, whether it's the PBM, whether it's the EMRs, across the board, we're all trying to crack this nut of high quality and lower cost. But getting into that physician workflow and helping them do the right thing and make the right decisions is really critical. And we really haven't put that top of mind of what is a physician experience if we're wanting them to adopt these tools to help them. We can't make their life harder. And then to the other point that was made of just actionable data and things that matter to them and are relevant to their patient's care. Because it may be shocking to folks to learn that the doctors don't really care if they're saving the health plan money. They care about the patient that's sitting in front of them and whether that patient can afford the medication or whether that patient is getting the best price within their benefit. So giving that visibility to, the doctors are going to make the best clinical decision. There are other tools we're working on to help them do that as well. But when it comes to the price of the medication, letting them have that visibility not only to the cost of the medication that maybe is their initial choice, but those therapeutic alternatives is critical. And it's critical to solving what I've always called the go fish problem, where doctors pick a prescription, process it through, they're told that either the patient can't afford it or the benefit plan doesn't cover it. And we've not always been great about showing them what would be aligned with the benefit or what would be affordable for the patient. And so the doctors are left to basically play go fish. Okay, let me try another one and see if that's covered. Let me try another one and try that and get the price on that and see if you can afford that one. So there's a lot of that back and forth and rework that this current design, or at least this iteration, at least gets us closer to more information for the physician at that point of care, which is really when those decisions should be made. And then they can have that conversation with their patient. And if they need to make a switch, they can do it right then and there. Much better experience for the patient, much more efficient for the physician, and most importantly, gets that patient on a therapy that they know they can afford and is aligned with their benefit.
Do you have something you wanted to add, Neil?
Well, the other thing I was going to say is you both mentioned one thing that I think we should talk about is EPA, or electronic prior authorization, because we also were piloting on that. And one of the biggest complaints, we were so excited about it, and then we got a lot of complaints when we first rolled it out because there were a lot of false positives or false negatives. And physicians got frustrated because they said, now you're just making me do more work, not less work. And a lot of times...
Can you explain, give us an example of a false positive and a false negative?
Well, so I might be on you might prescribe me a drug and it requires a prior authorization, so you do it for me. Come back 30 days later, you do a refill. Well, in the old system with representative form, they'd say, I need prior authorization again, not knowing that I'm authorized for 12 months of that. With this technology, it's looking at Neil Simon's benefit, and so it knows, oh, my prior authorization is good for a year, so now it's not going to prompt that physician to do an authorization he doesn't need to do. And we talked about how overworked they are. Well, making them do a false positive or false negative is just more work, and they really hate it. And they find it frustrating because they don't know why does it work this time and not work another time. And so I think it helps with price transparency, but I think the prior authorization benefits are just as important as the price transparency as well.
Yeah, they're hugely important. I used to have doctors say to me, if you're going to put a prior auth on it, I'm not going to prescribe it. I mean, that's the way it is. I see we have some people ready, and who wants to go first?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think we're both itching to talk about this because I completely agree with you, Neil, that the prior authorization process historically has been incredibly frustrating. We know it's very, very important to managing benefits, managing costs, all of those things, and in many cases managing safety as well. It's not just about cost, but there are safety reasons why some of these prior authorizations are put in place to protect patients. But the process has been very cumbersome. So I think the work that has gone into, across the industry, that has gone into driving electronic prior authorization, streamlining that process, getting those real-time responses and decisions back to the physicians in seconds to minutes as opposed to hours to days, has really been, I think, is moving us towards a transformation in the industry. We're not there yet. I think there's still a lot of work to be done for all of us to get where doctors really want us to be, which is, if you already have the data and you already know the certain elements that this drug's going to be approved or not approved, don't ask me a bunch of questions that you can either already have, or you can already answer from the data you have in your system, or the data that you can share between EMRs, and only interrupt the physician or the physician's office when it's absolutely necessary, or we don't have a critical piece of information that would actually help, would impact the decision. And right now it's kind of one size fits all prior authorizations, and we're asking questions that we should frankly be able to answer with the data we have. And I know that's where we're putting a lot of effort and investment. I know CVS Health is as well. So that's where we really need to get to. And I think just driving electronic prior authorization is a big step in that direction.
Yeah, and so just to build on that, everything that we're hearing, the number one piece of feedback that we're getting back from prescribers is the information that they have is not relevant, and it's not necessarily timely. And so fixing a few things are what we've focused on, which is, number one, making sure that prior auth information is specific to that member at that point in time. And we've now solved for that with everything going through Surescripts. I think the second piece is then making sure that the electronic prior authorization that's initiated also has the ability to be completed and decided in real time, like you said, in seconds. And for all of our criteria that come in through EPA, we've now done that. So you can get decisions in seconds, and you don't have that delay. But the third piece is the next frontier, which is when you already have the information and you can avoid doing the prior auth and going through that to begin with, making sure that we're reaching into the EMRs, collecting that data, and we're making progress there. We have a few areas where we've a few therapies where that's already been done, and a lot more to go. So essentially all of what this is doing is using data connectivity, putting it in the right place in the right time so that all of these administrative processes just go away. It's not making them more efficient, it's actually making the need for the existing administrative burden to just go away. And that's where we're all trying to go as a group.
So that's fantastic. And it leads me to a question for you, Tom. I think you're the right one to ask this too. So all of this sounds so cool. And I think back to my chief medical officer days and the complaints that I used to hear from the clunky systems that we had, and how much happier they would have been if they had this, much more streamlined process that you have. My question to you, Tom, is what kind of data are you collecting? So this sounds really cool, but the bottom line is, have you made health plans happier? Have you measured the health plan happiness? Have you measured the physician experience? And do you have any concrete metrics from patients? Because we've talked a lot about the physician, but at the end of the day, what's really important is that the patient is happy with the experience that they got sent to a pharmacy where it was the best price for the drug that was going to work for them. What can you tell us about metrics?
Yeah, we are absolutely collecting and gathering information behind the scenes to make sure that the value that we intended to bring is actually being brought forward. The primary focus here, quite frankly, has been and needs to be on what the patient needs. That's number one. We put the patient first. And we've all started to gather and share some information about this so that we understand the impact on decision making that real-time prescription benefits is having. And we see some great initial indicators of that. And we're very confident that as we go forward here, we'll see even more. On the prior authorization side, we've already seen major transformation there. We're reducing the time to approval. We're reducing the number of abandoned scripts that are occurring. We're seeing greater adherence to the prescriptions that are being made. All of these are indicators not just about efficiency, but really about the clinical efficacy of all this. That's what in the end is going to make a huge difference here. The great thing about digitizing all of this is that you do get that data, and it makes a big difference. And to their point, it furthers the story. This never ends. It's a constant challenge. What's over the next hill? How do we take more steps out of this? We don't want the friction to go away. There's friction in the system. That's what gets us to the right drug, through the right venue, and puts us in a position where the patients can afford this and will adhere to it. But on the other hand, you have to keep driving that barrier, driving that threshold down lower and lower, and we think as a team we're doing all of that.
Well, it sounds fantastic. So I have one last question, and then we'll throw it out to the audience for questions. And that is a little bit in the future, I think, and how specific is the information that you can give me as a prescriber? And by the way, I do think the patient needs to be included in this discussion, because these conversations are taking place in front of the computer now. I mean, I may have my back to you, but I'm talking to you anyway, right? So they're taking place, and the patient should be a part of it. And so my question to you is, how can we get to where I would really like to be in the conversation? And you can tell me we're already doing it, but I haven't heard it yet. In the conversation I have with my patient, I would like to be able to get to the point where I could say, you know, Mrs. Smith, I could give you this drug, and your personal out-of-pocket will be this amount. Or I could send you to a company who won't be named where you could get the drug for $5. Or you could go to Fifth and Mission. There's a pharmacy right there that has the lowest out-of-pocket for your benefit design, your plan. And that's what I would recommend doing, unless you want to get this $5 drug, which, you know, isn't exactly what I prescribe, but it's good enough. That's the kind of conversation I want to be able to have. And I want the patient to be able to make the final decision, because if we're really going to drive, you know, consumer-centric healthcare, then patients have to feel that they're making real decisions for themselves. So where are we at? Are we going to get there?
I mean, we're really close to where you just described. So today, when that doctor prescribes that drug, not only do we show the price, but we say, if you get it mail order for 90 days, it's this dollar figure. If you go to your pharmacy over here at the grocery store, it's, you know, this figure for 30-day supply. So that information is right there. Or if you go to the PBM directly for their mail order, here's what it is. We also show usually 3 or 4 alternatives. One's probably, if it's a brand or generic, another might be some different alternatives. They're similar medications. We show all that on one screen so the provider can see that and discuss it with the patient, because a lot of it's about expectation. If that patient knows when they go to the pharmacy, here's what they can expect to pay, and it's accurate, that patient feels confident going in, they're going to pick up that medication and then hopefully take that medication. It's also about disruption. Today what happens is the patient goes to the pharmacy, wants to get the medication, finds out, oh my gosh, it's $200, I can't afford it, because with high deductible plans, it might not just be a $10 copay or $20, it could be hundreds of dollars. And then the pharmacy then has to call the physician's office, and of course the physician's not sitting there on the phone answering the call in real time, and the patient either leaves the pharmacy or has to walk around, wait for a call back. So now the patient and the physician are in the same office together. It takes an extra minute to have that conversation, but now there's not all this disruption back and forth between the pharmacist and the physician and the patient. So it saves everybody time in the end. So I think we're really close to what you described.
I want to be clear, I think that's a mutual goal of all of us. So the goal is to keep patients adherent to the therapies that they need, and transparency we've seen is a big key in doing that. And full transparency means helping them understand what is the best, lowest cost way for them to get access to the medication that they most need. And I think, as everybody knows, we're both a pharmacy and we're a PBM. Our PBM networks with all pharmacies across the country, and so we're providing full transparency to those members and those patients on what are all of the lowest cost options available to them, because the ultimate goal really is their health and keeping them adherent to the therapies that they need.
Yeah, I'll just echo what the previous speakers have said, but I think there are really two. I agree, we're close. We're very, very close. We're not quite 100% there yet. I also think we need to keep in mind that we need to walk before we run a little bit with the physicians. This is all new to them. This is new to them, having this discussion and having this information available to them. So they've wanted it, they've asked for it, they're excited about it, but we also have to make sure we're not completely overwhelming them with so much data at that point of care that they can't process it all, and then they end up tuning it out. So I think this is the right step to say, okay, we're providing now the pricing transparency, the therapeutic alternatives, and the formulary coverage, meaning, does it require a prior authorization? Does it need step therapy? Those kinds of things. And then the 30 versus 90 versus home delivery. I think our next step will be to really go to that next iteration of the different pharmacy options, because patients now have different pharmacy networks in their plans. That's going to be really important. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our clients around, are we showing the cost to the payer? So what is the cost of the health plan? And we're not there yet, but I think there's some really interesting discussions that we need to have, because we know there's going to be demand for that. And I think the two pressures are industry forces that are going to really not only force us there, but really help us get there, is just the rise in patient consumerism. We've already talked a lot about that, is that the patient has a lot more at stake here in their high cost deductible plans, that they're paying out of pocket for a lot of these, and they need to have that information. And then also the drive towards value-based care for physicians and holding physicians accountable for their performance, and what are they choosing, and is that truly the most not only the most clinically appropriate, the most cost-effective choice for that patient. And docs are being measured on that now, so they care more about these things. They're more willing to have those conversations with their patients, because it's not just about the patient, although that's hopefully their priority. There's also an impact to the physician now as well that wasn't there even, say, 5 years ago.
Tom, do you want to have a last word before we throw it open to questions?
Yeah, I think the important thing that we're all saying here is we've got the patient's best interest in mind. We're trying to balance that with physician responsibility, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get this perfected, but we've been down this path before with a number of other similar use cases, and this is just a natural outgrowth of all that. This is really what the Surescripts Network Alliance is all about. This is what we do for a living.
I think this is a really interesting topic, because it has been such a pain point for such a long time. And a lot of the things that plans did, which they were doing on behalf of their members and on behalf of their clients who are employers. I mean, I don't know how many people understand that a lot of what health plans do is what their employer customers tell them they want to do. We like to point the finger at the plan, but it isn't always the right place to point the finger. And at the end of the day, we're trying to balance the need for patients to get what will help them get better and have good outcomes with the need to be shepherds of scarce resources. And one of the reasons why I think what you're doing with Surescripts and engaging the doctors is that physicians, by and large, have not felt that being shepherds of scarce resources was a part of their responsibility. And I think that you fundamentally changed the conversation. And I think by giving something back, by saying, you know, we can make, if you'll step up to the plate, and if we give you these tools, right, that'll help you be a good shepherd, then we'll give you something back. We'll make prior auth go away, or we could make step therapy go away. So I wanted to ask both of you if you could talk a little bit. We talked a lot about prior auth, and we know the onerousness of that, but how does this work with step therapy? So first, somebody explain what step therapy is, and then tell me how you're solving that thing that tends to annoy doctors and patients.
Do you want to explain the step therapy?
Sure. So essentially, step therapy is what most of us probably recognize as your physician picks a drug, and that drug isn't covered under your pharmacy benefit unless you've tried another drug or two drugs of that class before you get approval for that drug. So you kind of need to step up you need to fail therapy of a similar drug or maybe a generic before you get a higher order drug. So that's really kind of the premise of it. I think there's been a lot of progress made on really automating and fixing a lot of the headaches behind step therapy for the docs already. So I think giving them visibility that the drugs require step therapy is one piece of it. But speaking for Express Scripts, I know we've already automated quite a bit of that we have access to the pharmacy claims to know if that patient has had that first line required drug already.
But what if I did my step when I was in a different plan? I already did my step.
So depending on how long ago it was, and I think this is pretty true for both CVS and Express Scripts, that we exchange, we share clients, we exchange clients. And so when that happens, we get previous files for typically at least 12 months, or, in many cases, we get 24 to 36 months of previous claims. So we can go back and see, 1, 2, sometimes 3 years if that patient has had it. We also when we onboard a new client, we'll get previous prior authorization data. So we're not completely starting from scratch on each of these patients. So again, moving towards not interrupting therapy. If they've already met the requirements to get that second line drug, we really try to minimize that friction and not make them prove it again if we already have that in our data.
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce all of the behind the scenes to make sure that anytime there's a move, we still are capturing that history so that we've got the right look back logic. And, our ultimate goal is to help facilitate the right decisions with as little resistance and friction as possible. And, going back to prescribers, not necessarily their focus is on the patient. It's not on how am I helping the insurance plan save money. And
really,
but what we're all seeing is that with the rise of consumerism, getting the drugs in the hands of the patients really does mean helping them get to the lowest cost therapy. And so our job is to make sure we're taking the friction out to help influence that decision.
Yeah, I think and again, coming as a physician, I'm a little biased, but I truly believe the doctors want to do the right thing. They want to choose the most cost-effective drug. I think we've really evolved quite a bit from even, say, 10 years ago when doctors didn't think it was part of their job to discuss the finances. Those days, I think, for the most part, have changed. You still have some of the crusty docs who don't like it, but they'll always be there. Docs get it that we have a social responsibility to make good financial decisions as well. And even if they don't, they're being forced to see that in under value-based care arrangements. So I think we're there, that they're being much more aware of the importance of not just the clinical, but also the financial components.
Good. If you can hold 1 sec, because we got an audience question.
Hi. My name is Dave. Hey, I think this is for you, Neil. I may have, it's a clarifying question.
Can you hold the mic a little closer to your lips?
Yeah, okay, how's this? Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I came in a little bit late, but did I understand right that you're able to, or are working on the capability of, with Surescripts on, you select a drug, in your system, it goes to the PBM and brings back like copay, brings back, and then I don't know if Surescripts does this or maybe your system, you're bringing back therapeutic alternatives, you're bringing back cash alternatives, whether it's, I don't know if you're including discount cards or anything like that, but other alternatives versus going to third party.
Yeah, so yes, we're doing that today. So we do send and we get back therapeutic alternatives and get back the copay and based on their deductible, what it should be. So it's truly supposed to be, if I go to that pharmacy 5 minutes later, that's the dollars that I'm going to have to spend. Right now, it's really, a lot of it's based on the PBM. So we're not going out and going, like, we do offer cash discount cards and stuff like that, but we're not pricing all those into play and some of those out-of-pocket things. So right now, it does not display, everything that you might say for that particular thing.
But for the
So I'd love to share, because this is one of our most recent developments. So from the Caremark PBM, what this requires really is what we've built, which is a therapeutic alternative database that's comprehensive across all therapies and maps drugs within a class to therapeutic alternatives. The layer that needed to be put on top of that was member-specific coverage and formulary information. And then what needed to be put on top of that is a real-time call to say, where is this member in their deductible? Where is this member in their benefit? And what, depending on the pharmacy, is the out-of-pocket cost? So connecting all of those layers, the therapeutic alternatives, the member-specific coverage information, including EPA, whether a prior authorization is needed or not, where they are in their deductible, and the pharmacy information. Being able to provide all of that in real time is the connectivity that's just been released this year. And we're really excited about that, because having access to all of those in real time at the point of prescribing is what unlocks the right conversation that we're talking about having.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Is there another question?
Please come. Actually, can you stand right?
And this will have to be the last question, I believe.
Just a question about, from a usability perspective. She just mentioned, a call needs to be made so that you can get patient-specific information. On the pharmacy side, it's a lot faster than it used to be, but it still takes a few seconds. So in your solution, is it something that is an on-demand click for the provider if he wants or she wants the prescription and copay information, or is it viewable on every time you select a medication? And then is there any sort of delay that it takes to pull that information back in? It's a lot of information you're querying.
So we definitely didn't want to click, so we made sure we know doctors hate clicks or touches or whatever it happens to be. So it is real time, it's happening real time. It does take maybe 2 or 3 seconds. So sometimes the screen is up before that information is available back. We talked about not every PBM offers this service too, so we also have representative formularies for patients where we don't have the real-time benefit check. So both that data comes back in real time and is merged together and displayed for that provider. So there's a little section of the screen that if it's not there yet, it's got a little wheel waiting, and as soon as it comes up, it's displayed right away. So you don't have to click, you don't have to do anything, it happens on every script. And it really is even dynamic. So for example, if you pick a brick and mortar pharmacy, we're going to show you the brick and mortar copay first. If you have a mail order pharmacy for that patient, we'll show you the mail order pharmacy price first. If you switch the pharmacy, it'll switch which item it shows first. If you show a 90-day supply, where originally we thought it was going to be 30, as soon as you enter 90, we then call back out and pull that information in. So it's always working in the background, pulling that information in to make it as quick as possible. So not always instantaneous, but it's definitely there before the provider is done with the script. So the earlier we can make it available, the better.
Do you do any?
I think that's a really great way to highlight the importance of us as an industry all working together to make sure Surescripts and the PBMs and the pharmacies and the EMRs are all working towards a pretty consistent experience for the physicians. And, so we work closely with Surescripts, but we also are working directly with the EMRs on that feedback for the usability. So we can share because each EMR, part of their value prop is their user experience. So some EMRs They want it operating in the background, that the doctor would have to go and reach in and get it with a click. Others are very much more proactive, like Aprima, to say, no, we want this in front of the physicians. We want to make it easy, but we want to make it available to them. So a lot of it's just the philosophy and sort of the culture of that EMR that we're working to influence as well.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up, but I do want to thank the panelists for all the work that you do to make life easier for doctors and better for patients. And I want to particularly thank Surescripts for pulling together this panel and inspiring this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.